This is the MacBook Pro 2019, one of the last Intel MacBooks released before the M chips. It has a high DPI IPS display, a 6-core Intel CPU with integrated graphics, and a dedicated AMD Radeon GPU with 4GB of RAM. By default, it comes with 16GB of RAM and 512GB of storage, so for work in 2019, it is pretty good considering Apple's engineering. But we're talking about Apple, of course, so in 2019, this would run you about $1,500 on top of some issues. You see, while the specs look good on paper, the actual performance testing done by Apple was shoddy, and the actual inclusion of these Intel CPUs was pretty much for the name. So if you got one of these MacBooks back then, you could use it well, but the performance issues would be noticeable. Personally, I got this laptop as a hand-me-down in late 2023, so the value was much better than just a few years ago. Today, you can even find maxed out spec listings for these last Intel MacBooks, and it seems like a good deal. I mean, you can get a macOS device with good hardware for like, what, $300, $400? Yeah, seems good. But don't forget about that performance. It can be a tricky and cursed thing. But don't worry, because in this video, I'll help you get it right. There's a lot of interesting and specific information to getting these laptops to work better, and I'll help you learn with some tricks and important bits now that it's been 7 years since this laptop released. So, let's get into it. Probably the most important setup step you'll make when getting one of these laptops is with the OS. Now, no matter what you think, macOS Tahoe is a plague on these MacBooks. Even resizing the Finder will lag because all the liquid glass and SwiftUI apps are just not there with the architecture that Apple has built. And with this being literally the last update Apple is going to do for these Intel MacBooks, it is like crunching your MacBook if you install this update. Now, I understand some people might live in enterprise, so maybe you might need the security updates, or it's just protocol, but I would not voluntarily update to this version. If you want modern support and performance, I would recommend using macOS Sequoia because nothing drastic has been updated on that version. However, if you're willing to sacrifice a little bit for your performance, or you want some older app compatibility or something, it's not a bad idea to go back some versions. I think Catalina is the first officially supported version for these MacBooks, but I'm not exactly sure. If you have a really static workflow though, it can be pretty nice to use an older version. So just know what you want when it comes to macOS, and for those concerned about security updates, you're pretty much the vector for your own security, so unless some unpreventable vulnerability gets exposed, I wouldn't let that exclusively dictate what macOS version you use. Of course, macOS isn't the only OS you can install on these last Intel MacBooks. You could go with either Windows or even Linux if you wanted to, but there are compromises with each. If you decide to go with Windows, I believe Windows 10 is the last officially supported version for these MacBooks, and currently you can get extended security updates for it, but you can unofficially update to Windows 11 and probably use that fine if you want. You might even be able to leverage the T2 as a legit TPM, though I may be wrong. The main drawback of using Windows besides any Paradigms bootcap setup is that you will suffer in battery life, mainly because of a lack of GPU delegation for different apps. So your integrated GPU won't get used for simple apps, and you'll have to choose one GPU to run all your apps on. Also, like on macOS, your Windows might come to a crawl sometimes. I've experienced it on simple Lightroom editing before, and it sucks, but it may depend on your case. In general, for Windows compatibility, Boot Camp is the de facto solution, but you can also get Parallels on Mac or substitute that for Wine, as it has similar support to how it works on Linux. Speaking of Linux, there is a project to install Linux in the way you want on T2 Mac devices, and like Linux in general, you can inherit all of the great performance, freedom, and security that comes with it. But similar to the situation on Windows, battery life is less, even more so than Windows, and in my experience, the trackpad, speaker, and wake support have some issues in quality of use, so they may not be ideal in a quote-unquote supported manner. But if you work mostly at a desk or within comfortable reach of a charger, I would consider it as an option if you like using Linux. Overall though, due to the way macOS has been set up, it's kind of your best option if you want a jack of all trades. It has the best battery life, the drivers just work, and you can find all the functionality you need in apps if you're technical enough. But you don't need to be locked in though, because you can even try boot all of these operating systems and use whatever you want when you need. So ultimately, just figure out your priorities and install what you want with this info in mind. Besides the other settings you can configure on other operating systems though, it's best to look into the system preferences or settings to get some easy performance going. You might know about general stuff like using the right brightnesses and disabling battery heavy features like screen time and network access, but I would mainly focus on managing battery and display settings. These control most of your low-level performance, and it can be helpful to swap between different presets on the go to get maybe even an extra 30 minutes of battery life in the best case when you need it. The main setting you'll be adjusting in battery is automatic graphics switching. If you need it, disable it and watch the fans run. You'll get consistent performance across all apps, but it'll be loud. When you trust the system to handle performance, however, leave it on. As for display settings, it comes down to the semantics of how macOS handles rendering. All MacBooks nowadays are Retina or high DPI, so when you look at the screen from like the distance of a desk, it looks crisp. But the effort for that higher resolution doesn't come out of nowhere. You are likely rendering a little above 1440p on the recommended resolutions, and it may impact performance, so high DPI ain't cheap. However, it's the intended way to use a MacBook, and it can suck to go for a 1:1 resolution. It can improve performance, but it's a sacrifice. So ultimately, I would only go for it on a standard resolution display like 1080p or 1440p. Some people say it looks off, but you're using a display with that resolution anyways, so it's really your choice for how you want things to look. And if you're willing to sacrifice a little bit more for battery, it might even be good to switch to a lower refresh rate when on the go, because for tasks like Google Docs or messaging, why would you always need the highest refresh rate? Okay, now this might sound really redundant to some of you, but there actually is some methodology in using these masterfully crafted machines. Once you get into the basic habits of it, the machine becomes more bearable to use, but yeah, it's certainly its own thing. In general, try to keep the amount of apps you use to a minimum because eventually MacBook will crumble on macOS or Windows. I'm not sure if it crumbles on Linux, but just be wary. Only use what's necessary, and don't believe the paradigm of macOS when it comes to application management. There is truly a cost to keeping that many apps in cache, and sometimes you just need to kill them to move on to the next thing. This idea can also be extended to apps that live mainly in the menu bar. They are apps, and some of them are expensive to use, so don't have too many open besides essentials that improve the usability of your MacBook. Some examples that I personally have open always are linear mouse to manage different mouse device speeds, like on the trackpad and my desk mouse, and SyncThing for syncing files. I try not to have more open than that because those apps are truly necessary, and I want to level performance in that part so that the rest of my system doesn't actually crawl and die. Besides that, it's macOS, so just use it how you want and make sure you know how to manage keeping your apps open for when you do stuff like working with powerful apps or even screen sharing. Speaking of screen sharing, one thing you might want to do is screen record on macOS, and there are a few ways to do so on these Macs with varying results. The built-in QuickTime screen recording on macOS can work pretty well for most situations, and in Tahoe it can even record applications now, unfortunately, but the file sizes you get can be pretty large, and it requires some extendability with aggregate devices and the audio MIDI app to get desktop audio in a screen recording. It is very performant though, so you can get high quality screen recordings easily, but there are limitations because of its ties as a default macOS app. If you want the most features for screen recording, there's obviously OBS, which keeps getting improved over time to be better and better, but depending on your OS, the options for encoding can be a little tricky to get around, and your performance mileage may vary since OBS uses both the CPU and GPU for recording. If you want to live stream, OBS is one of your best options as it's pretty much the standard for doing that kind of stuff, but just know what you're running in your live stream as you can definitely come to a crawl even when running simple applications alongside OBS. If you're looking to do just exclusively local offline screen recording though, like with QuickTime, Quick Recorder by Lee Ho-yoon 6 on GitHub is actually a really good solution. It utilizes the Screen Capture Kit API and provides audio recording too, along with lots of relevant features. It's very simple to use and gives pretty much identical performance to QuickTime from what I've seen, with all the features that I'd actually want out of it as a user. Now, if you've ever thought about gaming on macOS, you'll know that it sounds pretty antithetical. I mean, there are many things on macOS that just don't suit the requirements needed for the variety of titles you might play over time, but there is a way to do some good gaming if you know how to work things out. If you want to play most Windows games that aren't barred by explicit prevention or the odd issue, Wine is your best bet for that. Wine is a compatibility layer that translates Windows applications to run on Mac and Linux, and it can even sometimes be better in some cases due to how things are handled. For example, with games like Terraria and The Binding of Isaac Rebirth, you may be inclined to run them natively since they have macOS builds, but those builds actually may not run as good as you think on macOS even though they're native. I can't actually tell you why this is the case because I don't know, but I can tell you that these games run way better on Steam through Crossover, which implements Wine to achieve these results that you're seeing here. And even though Crossover is paid, Wine is really popular, so you can find alternatives like the Heroic Games Launcher to run most of your favorite Windows games on macOS smoothly. So do your research, and macOS actually might not be that bad to play the games you actually want. So that's all I know. There may definitely be more things to cover, and the situation could totally improve with usability on Linux to extend the lifetime of these kinda cursed machines. But I hope this info could help you. If you have anything to mention in the comments related to this, feel free to leave it for others. Sometimes I find like really obscure information in random threads or comments that help me for years. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope you have a good day, and take care using these last Intel MacBooks as they are.